My children handed me a gift bag at my 72nd birthday dinner. Inside was a one-way ticket to a nursing home. They laughed, saying, "Happy journey, Mom." But when I found the hidden envelope under the ticket, my blood ran cold. Before we start, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. The restaurant was beautiful that night, with soft golden lighting and the gentle clink of champagne glasses around us. My 3 children had chosen my favorite Italian place, the one where their father had proposed to me 47 years ago. I should have known something was wrong when they insisted on paying, when they ordered the expensive wine, when they kept exchanging those meaningful glances across the table. But I was too happy, too grateful to have all 3 of them together for once, their busy lives usually keeping them scattered across the city. My name is Margaret Thompson, and for 72 years, I've believed that family comes first. It's a principle that guided every decision I've made, every sacrifice that seemed worthwhile at the time. When other mothers were pursuing careers in the 1970s, I chose to work night shifts at the hospital as a nurse's aide, so I could be home when my children woke up and when they came home from school. When my husband Harold was diagnosed with lung cancer 5 years ago, I became his round-the-clock caregiver, learning to administer medications, change IV drips, and hold him through the pain until he passed peacefully in our bedroom, in the house where we'd raised our family. People in our neighborhood know me as the woman who never says no. When Jennifer's friend needed a place to stay after her parents kicked her out, our door was open for 3 months. When Michael's basketball team needed uniforms and the school budget fell short, I worked extra shifts for 2 months to cover the cost. When David wanted to attend that expensive computer camp that would change his life, I quietly sold my mother's jewelry, the pieces she'd brought from Ireland, never telling anyone about the sacrifice. I'm the woman who still makes apple pies from scratch every Sunday, using the recipe my grandmother passed down. The one who taught Sunday school for 30 years, until the arthritis in my hands made it too difficult to manage the craft projects. My garden is known throughout the neighborhood, especially Harold's roses, which I've maintained religiously since his death. Each bloom reminds me of him, of the life we built together, of the dreams we had for our children. Those dreams seem to have come true. Michael became an investment banker with a corner office overlooking the city. Jennifer built a successful real estate empire, her face on billboards across town. David launched 3 tech companies before 40, his latest venture recently featured in Forbes. I kept every newspaper clipping, every award, every photo from their achievements, displaying them proudly in our living room. When friends visited, I'd tour them through my children's accomplishments like a museum curator, my chest swelling with pride at what they'd become. The gift bag was silver, elegant, with tissue paper that crinkled as I reached inside. They were all watching me, smiling, their phones out to record the moment. Michael had given a toast moments before about transitions and new chapters. Jennifer had teared up talking about how much I meant to them. David had squeezed my hand and said they only wanted what was best for me. But when I pulled out that glossy brochure for Sunset Manor, when I saw that one-way Greyhound bus ticket dated for tomorrow morning, when their laughter rang out at my shocked expression, something inside me shattered. It wasn't just the betrayal of being blindsided or the humiliation of learning about my fate in public. It was the realization that while I had been collecting memories of their achievements, they had been planning my disposal, treating the woman who gave them life like an old piece of furniture that no longer matched their decor. Life had developed a gentle rhythm in the 5 years since Harold passed. Every morning at 6:30, I would wake without an alarm, my body trained by decades of early rising. The left side of the bed remained untouched, his reading glasses still on the nightstand where he'd left them. But the sharp edge of grief had softened into something bearable, like a familiar ache that reminded me I had loved and been loved deeply. My morning ritual never varied. First, I'd brew a pot of Earl Grey tea, the same brand Harold had brought home from his business trip to London 30 years ago. We'd fallen in love with it together, and now each sip was a small communion with his memory. I'd carry my cup to the front porch, settling into the white wicker chair that creaked in all the familiar places. The birds knew my schedule. The cardinals would arrive first, bold and bright against the morning sky, followed by the chickadees and the occasional blue jay. Harold had built the bird feeder the summer before he got sick, and keeping it filled had become a sacred duty. By 7:30, I'd be in the garden, kneeling on the foam pad Jennifer had given me 3 Christmases ago when she still noticed things like my aching knees. The roses required daily attention, especially Harold's prized hybrid teas. Each bush had a story. The deep red Mr. Lincoln he'd planted for our 20th anniversary, the pale pink piece rose from when Michael graduated college. The yellow Julia Child he'd surprised me with after my mother's funeral, knowing how she'd loved that chef. I'd whisper to them as I worked, sharing neighborhood gossip and family news, the way Harold used to do. Tuesdays and Thursdays were library days. I'd volunteered there for 15 years, running the children's reading hour and helping elderly patrons navigate the new computer systems. It was ironic, really. Me helping other seniors with technology, while my own children assumed I couldn't manage my own email. The head librarian, Susan, had become a dear friend. We'd share lunch in the break room, swapping stories about our grandchildren and discussing the books we were reading. She'd often say I was the grandmother she wished she'd had, and I'd feel useful, needed, like I still had something to offer the world. The house itself was my masterpiece. A 2-story colonial built in 1952 with original hardwood floors that I polished monthly and crown molding that Harold had spent 3 summers restoring. Each room held layers of family history. The dining room where we'd hosted 37 Thanksgiving dinners. The kitchen where I'd taught all 3 children to cook. The wall beside the stove still bearing faint marks from when David had tried to flip pancakes at age 7 and missed. The living room where we'd gathered every Christmas morning, the same corner always reserved for the tree, the angel topper now faded but irreplaceable. Sunday dinners had been our tradition since the children were small, and I'd maintained them religiously even after they'd grown. By noon, my kitchen would be filled with the familiar sense of roasting chicken or beef, fresh bread rising in the oven, vegetables from my garden when in season. I'd set the table with my mother's china, the pattern she'd chosen as a young bride, each piece handled with the care of holding history. The children would arrive between 2 and 3, their voices filling the empty spaces that echoed during the week. These dinners were the highlight of my existence. Michael would tell stories from his office, using the salt and pepper shakers to demonstrate merger strategies. Jennifer would update me on her latest sales, her hands moving animatedly as she described staging homes for maximum appeal. David would try to explain his latest app in terms he thought I'd understand, not knowing I'd been secretly taking online courses to keep up with his world. For those few hours each Sunday, the house felt complete again, alive with the energy that had once been constant when they were young. The first odd moment came 3 weeks before my birthday, during what should have been an ordinary Sunday dinner. I had just served my famous pot roast, the one Michael always requested, when I noticed him texting furiously under the table. This itself wasn't unusual. The boys from his firm often contacted him on weekends. But when Jennifer's phone buzzed simultaneously and they exchanged a look across the table that seemed loaded with meaning, something in my stomach tightened. "Everything all right at work, dear?" I asked Michael, ladling extra gravy onto his plate the way he'd liked it since he was 7. He startled, actually startled, as if I'd caught him doing something wrong. "Oh yes, Mom, just some weekend filing deadlines. You know how it is." But he slipped his phone into his pocket with unusual haste, and I noticed Jennifer do the same. David, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly launched into a story about his latest venture, his voice a touch too loud, too cheerful, like when he was 16 and trying to distract me from the dent he'd put in Harold's car. Later, as I brought out the apple pie, I heard whispers from the dining room. My hearing wasn't what it used to be, but I caught fragments. too soon, needs to be handled, and what sounded like, get the papers ready. When I entered with dessert, conversation ceased abruptly. Jennifer was closing her laptop with a snap, shoving it into her designer bag with such speed that she knocked over her water glass. "Oh, Mom, I'm so clumsy," she laughed. But it was her nervous laugh, the one from when she was 12 and had broken my mother's vase. As I helped clean up the spill, I noticed a document on the table that Michael quickly covered with his napkin. All I glimpsed was a logo and what looked like the word assessment in bold letters. The following Sunday was even stranger. David arrived early, which should have been my first clue. David was never early. He walked through the house with an unusual interest, taking photos with his phone. "Just documenting memories, Mom," he said when I asked. But he wasn't photographing the family portraits or the wall of achievements I'd carefully maintained. He was taking pictures of doorways, the stairs, the bathroom, muttering about modifications and accessibility. Jennifer appeared in my craft room while I was setting the table, measuring the windows with a tape measure she'd pulled from her purse. "Thinking about getting you new curtains for your birthday," she said brightly when she saw me watching. But she was also measuring the door frame, jotting numbers in a small notebook, and when she thought I wasn't looking, she photographed the closet interior. The third Sunday, Michael brought someone he introduced as a friend from the club, a man named Robert, who seemed oddly interested in my daily routine. Over dinner, Robert asked peculiar questions. Did I ever forget appointments? How often did I drive? Did I have trouble with stairs? When I laughed and said I was healthier than most people my age, still doing yoga twice a week and walking 2 miles every morning, Robert exchanged what he must have thought was a subtle glance with Michael. "Mom's being modest," Michael interjected. "She's had a few little incidents." "Incidents?" I asked, genuinely puzzled. "You know, that time you forgot Jennifer's birthday," he said. "I didn't forget it," I protested. "I called her that morning. The card was late because the mail service lost it." But Michael was already moving on, telling Robert about a time I'd supposedly left the stove on, which had never happened, and an incident where I'd gotten confused at the grocery store, which was actually when I'd helped a lost child find his mother. Each fabrication was delivered with such smooth conviction that I began to wonder if my own memories were faulty. The gaslight was being lit, and I didn't even smell the smoke yet. That night, I lay in bed, staring at Harold's picture on the nightstand, trying to make sense of what I'd witnessed. The measuring, the photos, the strange questions from Michael's friend. My rational mind offered a perfectly reasonable explanation that I clung to like a life raft in churning waters. They were planning something special for my birthday. Of course they were. My wonderful, successful children were probably organizing the surprise party I'd always dreamed of, or perhaps renovating part of the house as a gift. "They're good children, Harold," I whispered to his photograph, the one from our 40th anniversary where his eyes crinkled with that familiar warmth. "Remember how they surprised us for our anniversary? Flew us to Hawaii without telling us until we got to the airport?" The memory made me smile. Jennifer had been so proud of keeping that secret. Michael had handled all the arrangements, and David had somehow managed to pack our bags without us noticing. The next morning, I called my friend Rose from next door, inviting her for tea. As we sat in my kitchen, sunlight streaming through the windows Jennifer had been measuring, I found myself laughing about my paranoid thoughts. "Can you imagine?" I told Rose, stirring honey into my Earl Grey. For a moment yesterday, I actually thought something sinister was happening. But you know what? I bet they're planning to update my kitchen. Jennifer knows I've been complaining about these old cabinets. Rose, ever the voice of reason, nodded supportively. "Your children adore you, Margaret. Look at everything you've done for them. They're probably planning something wonderful." I spent the next few days actively helping their surprise along. When Jennifer called asking about my schedule for the next month, I made sure to mention how free I was, how flexible my plans could be. When Michael inquired about my medications, asking for a complete list for his records, I assumed he was planning to take me somewhere tropical and wanted to ensure we had enough supplies. I even provided him with my doctor's contact information, thinking how thoughtful he was being. David's sudden interest in my finances seemed perfectly logical, too. "Mom, do you have all your paperwork organized? Insurance, bank accounts, the deed to the house?" Of course, I thought. They're probably setting up some kind of financial planning session for me, making sure I'm secure for retirement. How thoughtful of them to worry about their mother's future. I even helped them without meaning to. When I mentioned to Jennifer that I'd been occasionally forgetting where I put my reading glasses, laughing about how I'd found them in the refrigerator once, I didn't notice how intently she typed this information into her phone. When I told Michael about my little fender bender at the grocery store parking lot, emphasizing how the other driver had been at fault, I didn't see him exchange meaningful looks with David. The universe seemed to be confirming my optimistic interpretation. I found a travel magazine on Michael's car seat when he gave me a ride to the pharmacy with Caribbean resorts circled. Jennifer had left a tablet open on my coffee table showing gorgeous home renovation ideas. David had bookmarked articles about making Mom's life easier on the computer when he'd used it during a visit. "They're taking such good care of me," I told Susan at the library, practically glowing with maternal pride. "All this sneaking around, thinking I don't notice. They're just like when they were children trying to hide my Christmas presents in the garage." Susan smiled and agreed, though looking back, there was something in her expression that suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. I threw myself into preparations for whatever was coming. I had my hair done at the salon, bought a new dress in case they were taking me somewhere nice, even renewed my passport that had expired 2 years prior. Each night, I'd fall asleep imagining their faces when they revealed their surprise, how we'd laugh about all their secret planning, how this would become another beautiful family story to tell at future Sunday dinners. The discovery came on a Thursday afternoon, completely by accident. I had been cleaning Michael's old room, which I'd converted into my craft space after he'd moved out 20 years ago. The autumn sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes as I organized my quilting supplies. I was reaching for a spool of thread that had rolled behind the vintage sewing machine when my hand brushed against something in the wastebasket I'd tucked in the corner. It was a business card, expensive cardstock with raised lettering that spoke of professional importance. Sunset Manor Assisted Living, Luxury Senior Care, it read in elegant script. Below was a name, Patricia Henderson, Admissions Coordinator. Someone had crumpled it, as if in frustration or haste, but the gold embossing remained pristine. My heart performed a strange skip, like missing a step on familiar stairs. I sat on Michael's old twin bed, the one with the baseball-themed comforter. I couldn't bear to change, turning the card over in my hands. There was handwriting on the back in Jennifer's distinctive loops. "Mom, 3-bedroom available, corner unit, November move-in special." The words swam before my eyes. Move-in special. The phrase bounced around my skull like an echo in an empty house. Standing on shaking legs, I walked to the small desk where I did my scrapbooking. Maybe I was misunderstanding. Maybe this was research for one of Jennifer's clients. She dealt with real estate after all. Families often needed to find care facilities for elderly parents. But as I lifted a stack of magazines I'd been meaning to sort through, a folded email printout fluttered to the floor. The header made my blood turn to ice water. Mother's assessment. Moderate dementia diagnosis needed for involuntary admission. My hands trembled so violently I could barely read the rest. The sender was Jennifer's email address. The recipient was a Dr. Marcus Harrison, with a string of psychiatric credentials after his name. The email was dated 2 weeks ago. "As discussed," Jennifer had written, "we need documentation showing cognitive decline significant enough to override her objections. She owns the house outright and has substantial savings. My brothers and I have joint power of attorney, but only if she's declared incompetent. Can you work with the information we've provided? We can arrange for you to observe her at the birthday dinner if needed. The facility requires admission by November 1st to secure the unit." I sank into my crafting chair, the one Harold had bought me for my 60th birthday, and read the email 3 more times, hoping each reading would reveal a different meaning. But the words remained stubbornly clear. Involuntary admission. Declared incompetent. Override her objections. Beneath the email was another document, partially torn as if someone had tried to destroy it but given up halfway. It was a financial worksheet in Michael's precise handwriting. My house value, $850,000. My savings, $340,000. Harold's life insurance, $200,000 remaining. There were calculations in the margins. Divided by 3, minus facility costs. ROI if invested properly. My entire life reduced to numbers and percentages. I found myself going through the wastebasket more carefully, like an archaeologist excavating my own doom. There was a sticky note in David's scrawl. Mom's routine, library Tues Thurs, grocery wed, church sun AM, perfect window for assessment team. A receipt from a consultation with Sunset Manor dated 6 weeks ago, signed by all 3 of them. A printed text message conversation between Jennifer and someone named Brad about staging the house for maximum return. The room spun around me. Every family photo on the wall seemed to mock me. There was Michael's college graduation where I'd cried with pride, Jennifer's wedding where I'd spent months hand-beating her dress, David's first startup launch where I'd been his only investor. When had these beloved children become strangers capable of such calculating betrayal? I carefully collected each piece of evidence, placing them in a manila envelope from my craft supplies. My hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a cold numbness that spread from my chest outward. Outside, I could hear Rose calling her cat for dinner, the normal sounds of a normal evening, while my world silently collapsed in a room filled with the ghost of my son's childhood. The restaurant hummed with celebration when we arrived for my birthday dinner. Michael had reserved the private dining room at Tuscany Gardens, the same place where Harold had proposed to me in 1977. 20 family members had gathered. My sister Carol from Philadelphia, cousins I hadn't seen since Harold's funeral, Jennifer's teenage daughters who usually claimed to be too busy for family events, and even Michael's ex-wife Sandra, whom I'd remained close to despite the divorce. I wore my new emerald green dress, the one I'd bought thinking they were taking me somewhere special. In a way, I suppose they were. Jennifer had insisted on doing my makeup, her hands gentle on my face as she applied lipstick, telling me how beautiful I looked. For a moment, holding my face between her palms, I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Regret? Doubt? But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. The dinner was magnificent. Michael had ordered all my favorites: bruschetta, Caesar salad, chicken marsala, tiramisu waiting in the wings. The wine flowed freely, and Michael kept standing to make toasts. "To the woman who gave us everything," he said, raising his glass, "who sacrificed so we could succeed." The room erupted in appreciative murmurs and clinking glasses. I smiled, though the words tasted like ash in my ears. After the cake, 3 tiers with buttercream roses that looked eerily like the ones in Harold's garden. Michael stood once more. The room fell silent with anticipation. He reached beside his chair and produced an elegant silver gift bag with perfectly arranged tissue paper. Jennifer and David flanked him, their faces bright with what everyone else must have interpreted as excitement. "Mom," Michael began, his voice carrying that smooth authority that served him so well in boardrooms. "We've been planning this for months. You've given us so much over the years. Now it's time for us to take care of you." He handed me the bag with a flourish. The weight of it was wrong somehow, too light for the heaviness settling in my chest. I pulled apart the tissue paper, my fingers finding the glossy brochure first. The photos showed smiling seniors playing cards, walking through manicured gardens, dining in an elegant cafeteria. Sunset Manor, where life begins anew. Then I found the bus ticket, one way, dated for Monday morning, 6:45 a.m. departure. Senior discount applied. "Happy journey, Mom." Jennifer laughed, the the sound bright and hollow as a cracked bell. David started clapping, and others joined in uncertainly, not quite understanding what they were celebrating. I held up the ticket, my voice remarkably steady. "This is a one-way ticket to a nursing home." The clapping stuttered to a stop. My sister's face went pale. Sandra's mouth dropped open. "It's not a nursing home," Jennifer corrected quickly, her real estate training kicking in. "It's a luxury senior living community. They have activities, medical staff on site, 3 meals a day." "When was this decided?" I asked, looking at each of my children in turn. "We've noticed things, Mom," David said, his tone patient, patronizing. "You're getting forgetful. The house is too much for you to manage alone." "We've already handled everything," Michael added smoothly. "The paperwork is complete. Your room is ready. The house will be on the market Tuesday." "My house?" The words came out as a whisper. "Don't worry about any of that," Jennifer soothed, reaching for my hand. I pulled it away. "We'll manage the sale, handle your finances. You won't have to worry about anything anymore." My cousin Margaret spoke up, her voice sharp. "Did you ask her about this?" "Mom isn't capable of making these decisions anymore," Michael responded, not even looking at me as he spoke about me. "We've had her assessed. She has moderate dementia." "I've never been assessed," I said, louder now. "You have, Mom. You just don't remember," David said gently, as if speaking to a child. Several relatives exchanged uncomfortable glances. The room had become a theater, and I was both the audience and the show. My grandchildren were recording on their phones, thinking this was a sweet moment. The betrayal was being documented, celebrated, wrapped in tissue paper and ribbon. Looking at my children's faces, I saw strangers wearing familiar masks, and for the first time in my life, I understood that love could be a weapon aimed at your own heart. That night, after the disastrous dinner, I sat alone in my kitchen at 2 a.m., the house eerily quiet except for the grandfather clock Harold had inherited from his father. The silver gift bag lay on the table like evidence at a crime scene. I'd already examined the nursing home brochure 3 times, noting the astronomical monthly fees. $8,500 for the basic package they'd selected, but it was the small envelope tucked beneath the bus ticket that I'd been afraid to open. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside was a folded real estate listing, printed on Jennifer's company letterhead. My house, our house, where Harold had carried me over the threshold as a bride, where 3 children had taken their first steps, was already active on the market, listed for $850,000. The photos were recent, taken during those strange weeks when Jennifer had been documenting memories. She'd even staged it, replacing my comfortable, worn furniture with sleek, modern pieces in the digital images. "Charming, colonial, in prime location," the description read. "Estate sale. Motivated sellers." Behind the listing was another document that made my stomach lurch. Articles of organization for something called Thompson Family Holdings, LLC. Established 2 months ago. The members: Michael Thompson, Jennifer Hayes, and David Thompson. Equal shares. The business address was Michael's office. The stated purpose was real estate investment and asset management. They'd formed a company to dismantle my life. I spread the papers across my kitchen table, the same table where they'd done homework, where we'd shared thousands of meals, where Harold had proposed to me a second time on our 25th anniversary. Bank statements I'd never seen showed systematic withdrawals from the joint account I'd foolishly maintained with Michael for emergencies. $500 here, $750 there, always just below the amount that would trigger an alert. Over 6 months, they'd drained $15,000. A power of attorney document was tucked at the bottom, dated for tomorrow, no, today now, requiring my signature. The language was dense and legal, but the meaning was clear: complete control over all my assets, medical decisions, living arrangements. There was a yellow sticky note in David's handwriting. If she refuses, Dr. Harrison's assessment triggers automatic guardianship. Either way, we're covered. I found my laptop and with shaking fingers logged into my email. There, in my spam folder, were dozens of messages I'd never seen. Notifications from my bank about login attempts, alerts from credit monitoring services about new inquiries, an email from Jennifer's assistant, accidentally copying me. House cleaning scheduled for November 2nd, full estate sale prep. Family photos to storage unit as discussed. My retirement account website showed recent activity. They'd tried to change the beneficiaries but needed my physical signature. There was a note on the account. Customer called regarding confusion about beneficiary forms. Possible cognitive decline noted. The customer service log showed the call had come from Jennifer's phone number. The conspiracy went deeper than mere greed. I discovered they'd been building a case for months. There was a letter from a neighbor I barely knew, claiming I'd been acting confused and wandering at night. The same neighbor whose son worked at Michael's firm. A report from a wellness check I'd never experienced, signed by a nurse who'd never visited. Even a psychological evaluation from Dr. Harrison stating I'd shown significant cognitive decline during our session. We'd never met. They'd been thorough. My medical records had been requested under the guise of family concern. Every small mistake, every forgotten appointment, every momentary confusion had been documented, twisted, weaponized. The time I'd mixed up Jennifer's twins' names at Christmas became unable to recognize family members. The day I'd lost my keys and had to call David for my spare set became frequently disoriented and losing important items. I realized with crystal clarity that this wasn't a sudden decision or even a recent one. This was a long-term strategic dismantling of my autonomy, executed with the same precision Michael used for corporate takeovers. They hadn't just planned to take my house and money. They'd planned to erase me as a person, to transform me from their mother into a problem to be managed, a portfolio to be liquidated. The birthday dinner hadn't been a celebration. It had been a corporate merger, and I was the company being acquired against its will. I made it to my bedroom before the tears came, closing the door as if I could shut out the truth along with the rest of the house. The sobs erupted from somewhere deep in my chest, a primal sound I hadn't made since the moment the doctor told me Harold's cancer had spread to his liver. I collapsed onto our bed, clutching his pillow that still, after 5 years, held the faintest trace of his cologne. The memories came in waves, each one a fresh wound. Michael, age 4, burning with fever from pneumonia, and me holding him through endless nights, singing the only song that would calm him. I'd missed my own father's funeral because Michael couldn't be left, choosing my living son over saying goodbye to the dead. Now that same son had scheduled my removal from my home like a business transaction. Jennifer, at 13, sobbing in my arms after her first heartbreak, promising her that someday she'd find someone who deserved her beautiful heart. I'd stayed up making her favorite cookies, braiding her hair, telling her stories about how her father had courted me until she smiled again. The same hands that had wiped her tears had forged documents declaring me incompetent. David's high school graduation, when he'd pulled me aside and said, "Everything I am is because of you, Mom. You saved every penny for my education." I'll never forget that. But he had forgotten. He'd forgotten the second mortgage I'd hidden from Harold to pay for his computer camp, the wedding dress I'd wanted but didn't buy so he could have the latest programming books, the retirement cruise Harold and I had canceled to invest in his first startup. I found myself on the floor, photographs scattered around me like fallen leaves. Our wedding photo, Harold's face bright with promise, my mother holding infant Michael, her eyes full of hope for the future. Birthday parties, Christmas mornings, Easter egg hunts, all the small sacred moments that build a life. In every picture, I was smiling, believing I was building something permanent, something that mattered. The cruelest memories were the recent ones. Just last month, Jennifer had called crying about her daughter's college rejection. I'd spent 2 hours comforting her, reminding her that closed doors often lead to better paths. She'd said, "You always know what to say, Mom. What would I do without you?" while actively planning to find out. Michael bringing his new girlfriend to meet me 3 weeks ago, proud as he introduced us. "This is my mother," he'd said. "The strongest woman I know. She held our family together through everything." Past tense, I realize now. I had held them together. My usefulness had expired. The physical pain was real, a tightness in my chest that made breathing difficult. Was this what Harold felt when his heart gave out? This crushing weight of betrayal? But no. Harold had died believing our children loved us. He died proud of what we'd created together. That mercy had been denied me. I crawled to my dresser, pulling out the jewelry box Harold had given me for our 30th anniversary. Inside, wrapped in tissue, was the Mother's Day card from last year. All three had signed it. "To the world's best mom," it read. "Thank you for every sacrifice, every moment, every drop of love. We are who we are because of who you are." The irony was too much. I laughed through the tears, a broken sound that frightened me. They were right about one thing. They were who they were because of who I was. I had raised them. I had taught them to be strong, to be strategic, to go after what they wanted. I just never imagined what they'd want would be my erasure. I lay on the carpet until dawn broke, watching the ceiling lighten with the new day. Monday. In 24 hours, I was supposed to board a bus to Sunset Manor with whatever I could carry, leaving behind 72 years of life. The house would be stripped, sold, divided. My gardens would be someone else's. Harold's roses would be torn out for modern landscaping. But as the sun painted my bedroom walls gold, something shifted inside me. The tears dried. The shaking stopped. I sat up, surrounded by the debris of my grief, and felt something harder than sadness settle in my bones. It felt like determination. It felt like the strength that had gotten me through Harold's death, through raising 3 children alone while he traveled, through every challenge life had thrown at me. My children had made one critical miscalculation. They thought I was already gone. Retriam Sunday morning arrived with unusual clarity. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of Harold's roses through my bedroom window. I stood before the mirror, studying my reflection. 72 years old. Gray hair that Jennifer had styled for what she knew would be my last birthday in this house. Lines around my eyes from decades of smiling at my children's accomplishments. Hands spotted with age, but steady as granite. "I'm sorry, Harold," I whispered to his photograph on the dresser. "I'm sorry I raised wolves who dressed themselves in sheep's clothing. But you always said I was stronger than I knew. Time to prove you right." I walked through my garden with new purpose, touching each rosebush like a general reviewing troops. The Mr. Lincoln stood tall and defiant, its deep red blooms refusing to acknowledge the approaching winter. Just like me, I thought. These roses had survived aphids, black spot, harsh winters, and neglect during Harold's final months. They'd survived because they had deep roots and thorns for protection. My neighbor Rose was watering her petunias over the fence. "Margaret, dear, you look different this morning," she observed, studying my face with concern. "I am different," I replied, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Rose, do you remember when Harold was sick, and I told you I'd fight death itself for more time with him? Of course. You were fierce. The nurses called you the warrior wife. Well, now I need to be the warrior mother, not for them, but despite them." I went inside and pulled out my address book, the old-fashioned kind that Jennifer mocked me for keeping. But unlike digital contacts that could be monitored or deleted, this was mine alone. I found the number I needed. James Brennan, my nephew in Boston. Harvard Law, class of 2010, the boy whose recommendation letter I'd written, whose law school tuition I'd helped with when his father lost his job. Then I turned to the community I'd built without realizing it. Susan from the library who'd mentioned her daughter was an elder law attorney. Father Timothy, who'd held my hand through Harold's funeral and knew the truth of my mental clarity better than any fraudulent doctor. The couple from church, whose son worked in the state's elder abuse division. I'd taught their daughter piano 20 years ago. Standing in my kitchen, I looked at the bus ticket on the table. Monday, 6:45 a.m. They expected me to walk quietly to my own exile, carrying my suitcase like a refugee from my own life. They expected submission, confusion, the gentle decline into irrelevance they'd scripted for me. I picked up the ticket and held it to the light. Such a small thing to represent such enormous betrayal. Then I walked to Harold's study, unchanged since his death, and opened the safe he'd installed behind his collection of first edition books. Inside were documents my children didn't know existed. The trust Harold had set up 3 years before his death, naming James as executor if I became truly incapacitated. The medical power of attorney that specifically excluded our children, a decision Harold had made after watching his brother's family tear each other apart over money. "You were right to be cautious, my love," I said to the empty room. "You saw something I was too blind to see." The grandfather clock chimed 9. I had 24 hours before the scheduled pickup. 24 hours to turn from victim to victor. My children had spent months building their trap. They'd been thorough, methodical, strategic, but they'd forgotten one crucial thing. I was the woman who'd raised them. I knew every weakness, every fear, every secret they'd whispered in the dark when they were small and trusted me with their whole hearts. More importantly, they'd made the fatal error of believing their own fiction. They'd told so many people I was confused and helpless that they'd started to believe it themselves. They wouldn't expect resistance. They certainly wouldn't expect revenge. But as I stood in Harold's study, surrounded by the life we'd built together, I made a promise to his memory and to myself. I would not go gentle into that good night. I would rage against the dying of the light, not of my life, but of the illusion that my children were good people who loved me. That illusion was dead. Now it was time for resurrection, not as their mother, but as Margaret Thompson, a woman with deep roots and hidden thorns, who was about to show them exactly who they'd underestimated. I moved through Sunday with the precision of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. First call, James in Boston. His voice went from sleepy to alert in seconds when I said, "I need your help. Your cousins are trying to have me declared incompetent and steal everything your uncle and I built." "Aunt Margaret, I can be there in 3 hours." "No, not yet. I need you to do something else first." I explained about the forged medical assessment, the fraudulent Dr. Harrison, the systematic draining of accounts. James listened, occasionally making sharp intakes of breath. "Can you file an emergency injunction to freeze any property transfers?" "I'll have it filed within the hour. Aunt Margaret, this is elder abuse, criminal fraud. They could face prison time." "Let me handle this my way first," I said, "but have everything ready." My second call was to Father Timothy. "I need a favor," I began. "Could you arrange for several witnesses to be at my house tomorrow morning at 6:30? People who can attest to my mental state?" "Margaret, what's happening?" "My children are trying to put me in a nursing home against my will. They've told everyone I have dementia." His silence was heavy with anger. "How many witnesses do you need?" "As many as possible. And Father, bring your camera." Next, I drove to the bank, not my usual branch, but the main office downtown. I requested to speak with the manager, showing him the fraudulent withdrawals from my account. I need to open new accounts, individual ones, and transfer all remaining funds immediately. I also need records of every transaction for the past 6 months. The manager, a young man who looked at the evidence with growing alarm, worked quickly. "Mrs. Thompson, this appears to be financial exploitation. We're required to report this to Adult Protective Services." "Please do," I replied. "Report it immediately." I installed security cameras that afternoon, small ones I ordered for same-day delivery. The irony of using David's own Amazon Prime account, still logged into my computer, wasn't lost on me. I positioned them strategically: the living room, kitchen, front door, and hallway, all connected to a new cloud account my children didn't know existed. Susan from the library put me in touch with her daughter, Patricia, who arrived within hours. An elder law specialist who'd seen too many similar cases, she reviewed my documents with professional fury. "They made one crucial error," she said. "The power of attorney isn't valid without your signature or a court order. And this, Dr. Harrison, he could lose his license if he truly signed an assessment without examining you." "He doesn't exist," I said. "I already checked. The real Dr. Harrison is a pediatrician in Connecticut who's never heard of me." Patricia's smile was sharp. "Even better. Forging medical documents is a felony." I spent the evening organizing everything: bank statements showing the theft, emails documenting the conspiracy, the fraudulent medical assessment, the forged documents. I made multiple copies, storing them in places my children would never think to look. One set went into a safety deposit box at a bank across town. Another went home with Susan. A third was uploaded to James's secure server in Boston. Then I called the Real Estate Commission and reported Jennifer for listing my property without my consent. I contacted the 3 major credit bureaus and froze my credit. I called Adult Protective Services myself, filing a report of attempted elder abuse. Each action was a small victory, a reclaiming of the control they'd tried to steal. My final preparation was the most satisfying. I scheduled my own comprehensive medical evaluation for Monday afternoon with 3 separate physicians, including a neurological specialist and a psychiatrist. "I need extensive cognitive testing," I explained. "My children are claiming I have dementia to steal my estate." As midnight approached, I sat in my living room with a cup of Harold's favorite tea, looking at the family photos still arranged on the mantel. In 12 hours, my children would arrive expecting to find a confused old woman ready for disposal. Instead, they'd find something else entirely: their mother, armed with evidence, witnesses, and the kind of righteous fury that had once made Harold say, "I could stare down the devil himself." The trap they'd built for me had become my weapon. Every document they'd forged, every lie they'd told, every dollar they'd stolen was now evidence against them. Tomorrow morning, the hunters would become the hunted Monday morning, arrived with theatrical perfection. The sunrise painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, as if nature itself had dressed for the occasion. I woke at 5:30, calm as a lake before a storm. I dressed carefully in my navy suit, the one I'd worn to Harold's funeral, adding the pearl necklace he'd given me for our 40th anniversary. If my children wanted to bury me, I'd dress for the occasion. By 6:15, cars began arriving. Father Timothy came first, followed by Susan from the library with her daughter Patricia. Rose from next door brought her husband and her sister, who was visiting from Maine. The couple from church, whose son worked in Elder Protective Services, arrived with a state investigator who'd worked through Sunday night after receiving my report. Dr. Sarah Whitman, my physician for 15 years, came with her medical bag and testing equipment. Even the mailman, Roberto, who delivered letters to our house for 2 decades, showed up in his uniform before his shift. My living room filled with witnesses. I served coffee and the cinnamon rolls I'd baked at 4 a.m., their warm scent filling the house with an almost absurd domesticity. Everyone positioned themselves with clear sightlines to the front door. Father Timothy set up his camera on a tripod. Patricia placed her recording device on the coffee table. The state investigator, Mr. Martinez, stood by the window with his official tablet ready to document everything. At 6:30, Susan's daughter checked her phone. "The nursing home van just turned onto your street." "Everyone ready?" I asked, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. The room hummed with anticipation, like a theater audience waiting for the curtain to rise. Through the window, I watched a white van with Sunset Manor painted in cheerful letters park in my driveway. But that wasn't what made my heart race. Behind it, Michael's BMW pulled up, followed by Jennifer's Range Rover and David's Tesla. They'd all come to watch their mother be taken away to ensure their plan proceeded smoothly. The doorbell rang at exactly 6:45. I opened it to find two orderlies in scrubs standing with a wheelchair, my children arranged behind them like a corporate board meeting. Michael held a folder of documents. Jennifer carried an empty suitcase, presumably for whatever belongings I'd be allowed. David was already on his phone, likely checking the house listing. "Good morning, Mom," Michael said with his businessman smile. "These nice people from Sunset Manor are here to help you to your new home." "Good morning, Michael." I stepped aside. "Please, everyone come in. I've made cinnamon rolls." The confusion on their faces as they entered my crowded living room was priceless. Michael recovered first, his smile tightening. "Mom, who are all these people?" "Witnesses," I replied simply. The orderlies looked uncertain, glancing between my children and the room full of people. One of them, a young woman with kind eyes, spoke up. "Ma'am, we were told you had moderate dementia and might be confused about the move." Dr. Whitman stood up, her presence commanding despite her small stature. "I'm Dr. Sarah Whitman, Mrs. Thompson's physician. I examined her yesterday evening. Her cognitive function is completely normal. I have the test results here." "That's impossible," Jennifer interjected, her voice shrill. "Dr. Harrison said—" "Dr. Marcus Harrison?" Mr. Martinez, the state investigator, stepped forward, badge visible. "The psychiatrist who supposedly evaluated Mrs. Thompson? We've been trying to locate him regarding fraudulent medical documents." The room went still. David lowered his phone. Michael's folder trembled slightly in his hands. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Michael began, using his boardroom voice, but Father Timothy had started the camera, its red light blinking steadily. "No misunderstanding," I said, walking to the mantel where I'd placed the manila envelope. "I have evidence of everything. The forged medical assessment, the unauthorized bank withdrawals, the LLC you formed to liquidate my assets, the house listing that went live without my knowledge or consent." The orderlies began backing toward the door. "We're not taking anyone against their will," the young woman said firmly, "especially not with all this uncertainty." "Wait," Michael commanded, but his authority had evaporated. "You have to take her. We paid the deposit. Everything's arranged." Patricia stood up, her lawyer's presence filling the room. "Actually, Mr. Thompson, what's been arranged is your arrest if you continue this attempted kidnapping and elder fraud." The silence that followed Patricia's words was deafening. Then Michael laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "This is ridiculous. We're her children. We have power of attorney. Mom's just confused and has turned everyone against us." "Show them the video," I said quietly. Susan pulled out her laptop, connecting it to my television. The screen flickered to life, showing security footage from my kitchen from 2 weeks ago. There they were, my 3 children sitting at my table while I was at the library. Their voices filled the room through the speakers. "The old bird has no idea," Jennifer was saying, rifling through my papers. "I almost felt bad at dinner when she kept talking about visiting Carol in Philadelphia for Christmas." "Don't go soft now," Michael replied. "We've come too far. The house alone will net us at least $280K each after the capital gains." David's voice chimed in. "The beauty is, even if she figures it out, who's going to believe a 72-year-old woman over 3 successful professionals? We've laid the groundwork perfectly." The room watched as the video showed Jennifer practicing her concerned daughter act. "Mom, we're just worried about you," she said in a mock-caring tone before dissolving into laughter. But I wasn't done. "There's more," I said, nodding to Susan. The next video was from yesterday, Sunday evening. After I'd discovered their plan, I'd called each of them separately, recording everything. Michael appeared on screen first, his voice coming through my phone on speaker. "Mom, you sound upset. Have you been taking your medications?" "Michael, I found the documents. I know what you're planning." His tone had turned cold. "You found nothing because there's nothing to find. And even if there was, you're a confused old woman who can't even remember where she puts her glasses. Just make this easy on everyone." Jennifer's call was next. "Mom, stop being dramatic. You've had a good run, but it's time to face reality. The house is already listed. The buyers are lined up. You can go to Sunset Manor willingly, or we can have you removed. Your choice." David's was the most chilling. "You know, Mom, it's funny. You always said family comes first. Well, we learned that from you. Our families, our futures, come first. You had your time." The room erupted. Father Timothy stood up, his face red with indignation. "In 40 years of ministry, I've never seen such callous disregard for a parent." Roberto, the mailman, spoke up. "Mrs. Thompson helped my daughter with her college essays. She got into Northwestern because of her. This woman has more clarity and kindness than anyone I know." Mr. Martinez was typing rapidly into his tablet. "This is evidence of conspiracy to commit elder fraud, attempted kidnapping, and financial exploitation. You're all under investigation as of now." But the biggest shock was yet to come. I pulled out one final document. "There's something else you should know," I said, looking directly at my children. "Harold knew. Somehow your father knew." I held up the document, hands steady. 3 years before he died, he changed his will and created an irrevocable trust. I never knew until I went through the safe yesterday. The house, the investments, everything except my personal savings, it's all in a trust that can only be dissolved with the agreement of the executor." "Who's the executor?" Michael demanded, his face pale. "James, your cousin James, the one whose law school tuition I paid when you said we shouldn't waste money on extended family." Jennifer gasped. "That's impossible. We would have known." "Your father used a lawyer from his army days, someone you'd never think to check. He wrote a letter explaining why." I unfolded Harold's handwriting, my voice breaking slightly as I read. "I love our children, but I fear what they've become. Margaret's love blinds her, but I see the greed growing. If you're reading this, they've shown their true colors. Protect her. She gave them everything and deserves better than betrayal." David sank into a chair. Jennifer started crying, whether from shame or frustration, I couldn't tell. Michael stood frozen, calculating, probably already thinking about legal challenges. "The house," Jennifer whispered. "We already promised buyers." "The house that was never yours to sell," Patricia interrupted. "That's fraud. Real estate fraud, to be specific." The doorbell rang. 2 police officers entered, followed by another man in a suit. "We're here regarding a report of elder abuse and attempted financial exploitation," the officer said. "We need Michael Thompson, Jennifer Hayes, and David Thompson to come with us for questioning." The room watched in stunned silence as my 3 children were escorted out in front of everyone. The same public humiliation they'd planned for me, but with handcuffs instead of a wheelchair. The investigation that followed was swift and thorough. Within 2 weeks, the full extent of my children's scheme unraveled like a cheap sweater. Michael's firm launched an internal audit after news of his arrest spread, discovering he'd been using similar tactics with 3 elderly clients, promising their families favorable investment terms in exchange for cooperation in declaring them incompetent. His banking license was revoked before Thanksgiving. The corner office with the city view was cleaned out while he sat in a courtroom, listening to a judge deny his request for reduced bail. Jennifer's real estate empire crumbled even faster. The state board received 17 complaints within days from elderly clients who recognized my story in the news. Her face, once proudly displayed on billboards across town, became a liability. Her agency terminated her contract and sued for damage to their reputation. The Range Rover was repossessed when investigators froze her assets. She moved in with a friend from her divorce, the irony not lost on anyone that she now depended on. Charity after trying to steal mine. David's investors fled like rats from a sinking ship. Tech entrepreneurs, it turned out, were particularly sensitive to publicity involving elder abuse. His latest venture, an app ironically designed to help families manage aging parents' care, became a punchline in Silicon Valley. The Forbes article that had featured him was updated with a new headline: From Tech Wonder to Elder Fraud, The Fall of David Thompson. All three received 2 years probation and were ordered to pay restitution, not just to me, but to Michael's other victims. They were mandated to attend weekly therapy sessions on family dynamics and ethics, sitting in circles with other offenders, explaining how they'd betrayed the people who loved them most. The therapist, Dr. Rachel Chen, later told me she'd never seen 3 siblings so unable to acknowledge genuine wrongdoing, each blaming the others for leading them astray. The house became alive again, but differently. My grandchildren, Jennifer's twins, Sarah and Emma, reached out through Instagram, mortified by their parents' actions. They visited the next Sunday, helping me in Harold's garden, tears streaming down Sarah's face as she apologized for a crime that wasn't hers. "Grandma, we had no idea. Mom told us you were sick, that this was what you wanted." Michael's ex-wife Sandra became a regular visitor, bringing her new husband and stepchildren. "I always wondered why Michael was so secretive about his mother," she confided over tea. "Now I understand he was ashamed of his own plans, not you." David's girlfriend left him the day after the arrest, but not before calling me. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm so sorry. I should have seen the signs. He was always talking about inheritance like you were already gone." The most unexpected resolution came from the community. My story spread through town like wildfire, but instead of pity, I found solidarity. Other elderly parents reached out, sharing their own fears about their children's intentions. We formed a support group that met weekly at the library, calling ourselves the Silver Shields. Susan helped us set up legal workshops, teaching seniors how to protect their assets and recognize signs of exploitation. Rose from next door became more than a neighbor. She became family. We shared dinners, watched old movies, traded stories about better times. Her sister from Maine moved to town, buying Jennifer's foreclosed house at a fraction of its value, turning my betrayer's former visits into friendly waves over the fence. Father Timothy asked me to speak at church about forgiveness and justice. "Forgiveness," I told the congregation, "doesn't mean accepting abuse. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their choices." The sanctuary filled with applause, something that rarely happened during sermons. My nephew James handled the trust with integrity, ensuring everything remained protected while allowing me full use of my resources. He visited monthly from Boston, bringing his children, who called me Aunt Maggie, and filled the house with the kind of genuine laughter that had been missing for years. He was the son Harold had seen him to be, even if he wasn't ours by blood. 6 months after that horrible birthday dinner, I stood in my garden, now expanded with help from the Silver Shields volunteer program. Harold's roses bloomed more beautifully than ever, as if thriving on justice served. The house was mine until my last breath, and I intended that breath to be far in the future. My children had given me a gift after all. They'd shown me that family isn't always blood, and sometimes the best revenge is a life well lived without the people who tried to destroy it. 1 year later, on my 73rd birthday, the same Italian restaurant hosted another dinner. This time, I'd chosen the guests. The private dining room overflowed with genuine love. Rose and her sister, Susan and Patricia, Father Timothy, Dr. Whitman, Roberto and his family, James with his wife and children, Sandra and her new family, my grandchildren Sarah and Emma, and 15 members of the Silver Shields. The owner, having heard my story, insisted dinner was on the house. "Mrs. Thompson," he said with tears in his eyes, "my mother went through something similar. You give us all hope." As I looked around the table, I realized Harold's roses weren't the only things that bloomed after betrayal. I had discovered a garden of human kindness that had always existed around me, waiting to reveal itself when the weeds of false family were cleared away. Sarah and Emma had moved in with me for their senior year of high school, legally emancipating themselves from Jennifer with my support. They helped me modernize the house, not to sell it, but to fill it with new memories. Emma was heading to nursing school, inspired, she said, by my stories of caring for Harold. Sarah had chosen law school, determined to protect the vulnerable from predators, even when those predators shared their DNA. The Silver Shields had grown from 12 members to over 200, with chapters forming in neighboring towns. We'd helped 17 seniors escape similar situations, working with law enforcement and adult protective services to create a rapid response team for elder exploitation. The state legislature invited me to testify about strengthening elder abuse laws. I wore my navy suit and Harold's pearl necklace, speaking truth to power about how the people we trust most can become our greatest threats. My children had each written letters from their court-mandated therapy. Michael's was formal, still deflecting blame onto miscommunication and misunderstandings. Jennifer's was tear-stained but shallow, lamenting the loss of her business more than the loss of her mother. David's was the most honest, a single line. I became someone I don't recognize, and I'm sorry you paid the price. I kept the letters in the same drawer as their baby photos, evidence that people can transform in both directions. I learned that blood doesn't determine loyalty. The woman who gave birth to you can be a stranger, while the neighbor who brings soup when you're sick becomes sister. The children you raised can become vultures circling your assets, while the postal worker who delivers your mail watches over you like a guardian angel. Family isn't about shared genes. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and the choice to show up when showing up is hard. Greed is a poison that makes children forget the hands that fed them, clothed them, and wiped their tears. It transforms love into a transaction, memories into leverage, and parents into problems to be solved. My children inherited Harold's eyes, my stubborn chin, and our combined intelligence. But somewhere along the way, they lost the only inheritance that mattered: the understanding that love isn't measured in dollars and dignity isn't negotiable. The saddest betrayal isn't from enemies who attack, but from loved ones who plan your disposal over Sunday dinner while eating food you prepared with love. It's the laughter around your birthday cake as they hand you a one-way ticket to erasure. It's the practiced lies, the manufactured concern, the theatrical performance of care, while documents declaring your incompetence sit in their briefcases. But here's what my children didn't understand. Mothers aren't just the women who give birth. We're the phoenixes who rise from the ashes of betrayal. We're the roses that grow thorns when threatened. We're the silver shields that protect ourselves and others when our own swords turn against us. We may be old, but we're not obsolete. We may be trusting, but we're not stupid. And when pushed to the edge of exile, we don't fall. We fight. What would you do if your own children conspired to steal your life? Would you have seen the signs earlier than I did? Would you have fought back or surrendered to keep the peace? How many of us ignore red flags because they're being waved by people we love? If you have elderly parents, ask yourself honestly, do you see them as full humans with agency and dreams, or as problems to be managed? If you're a senior watching this, do you have safeguards in place? Have you protected yourself legally, financially, and emotionally from those who might exploit your trust? Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. A parent who needs protection, a child who needs perspective, or a family that needs a warning. Love shouldn't be conditional on weakness, and family shouldn't be a corporate merger where the vulnerable get absorbed and eliminated. Remember, the best inheritance you can leave isn't money or property. It's the lesson that standing up for yourself is never wrong, even when you're standing against the people you brought into this world. Because sometimes, the family you choose is worth more than the family you're given. And a house filled with chosen love is worth more than a mansion filled with calculating strangers who happen to share your last name.